Inner Season 14 on the air of Radio Wrocław Kultura. It's our third discussion, and this one is titled Four Walls Around Us, the same way as yesterday's the video essay that we premiered yesterday at Polish Cinema for Beginners social channels. Today in Radio Wrocław Kultura studio, our guest is Dr. Paweł Czajkowski, sociologist associated with the Department of Gender and Family Sociology at the Institute of Sociology, University of Wrocław. Yeah. Welcome to Radio Wrocław Kultura. Welcome to Polish Cinema for Beginners.
Thank you.
So let's start with Polish family, and maybe let's start with a model of Polish family. Is that something like this in our society, like 2+2, two parents, two kids, and that's a Polish family, and that's the end?
Yeah, I would say more or less yes, but what is more interesting for sociologists, it's tendencies of changes, mostly.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. The most common model of Polish family, it's something like that, 2+2
nowadays,
parents and kids, but much more, I would say much more even 2+1, yeah, because fertility is decreasing still, so Polish society is one of the, probably as far as I remember, it's one of the society in Europe which with lowest fertility in. So it's much more toward the model 2+1.
Okay, what about 30 years ago?
It was 2+2.
Yeah. Okay, so when I asked 50 years ago, it was 2+3, right?
Yeah, the model 2+2. It's a model in long term, I would say. So it's, for instance, because we are talking about cinema, Polish cinema, and for instance, we can mention one of the most interesting series in Polish cinema. I mean the 40-latek, yeah,
40-year-old,
40-year-old, yeah, and that was more or less the picture of model family in modernizing society, industrializing society during the socialist time, and it was presenting exactly this type of models family. Yeah, so 2+2. Yeah?
You've mentioned the change that has been going on for decades, and that sociology is looking at that change of the model of the family, but also the image of family in the cinema changed quite a bit since the 70s, let's say, where the 40-year-old premiered, but also like even if we look further, there is so-called Civil War, though it's not the perfect translation of the title, the TV series that also showed even more conservative model of the family with stay-at-home mom and always busy dad. Is there a difference between how the family is portrayed in the cinema and how your profession, how sociology sees family? Are there some differences that are easy to pinpoint and worth to know about?
If I had to compare the picture showing presented in film and picture describing in sociology, I would say there is a different perspective, because I try to explain it much easier as it is possible. So for me, the picture in film is talking much more about problem within family. What is going within family? Specific problems. I would say if we will mention some titles, it will be just like that. I would say it is kind of a case studies of specific problems. The perspective, sociological perspective, is focused much more on not what's going within family, but what's going with family. So we are much more focused about structure, construction of family, and what is changing with this I would say frame for what's going on in it. Yeah. So, for instance, the basic question: what is the model 2 + 2 or 2 + 1? It is the picture of structure.
Okay, so about this structure, we have this factor of time. I ask you about how Polish family looks like nowadays and 30 years ago or 50 years ago. So can we answer for the question about location of this family? So in big cities, there are some kind of families, and rural parts of country, there are other models of family.
Yeah, probably it's
models, of course, not parts.
Yeah. Probably I don't have an exact number, but there is such a division. But it's of course the broad division because when we are looking in specific numbers, it's always much more complicated. But anyway, in broad picture, there is kind of spatial division, like as you said, the big cities are much more diversified in models of family. The small cities and villages, that's the space of I would say fundamental traditional model of family.
Okay.
So if we are talking about tendencies of changes, the tendencies of changes are mostly, I'm just approximating, mostly located in this space like big cities.
Okay, have you ever considered the differences between families according to architecture? Because in Jan Petr Matuszynski movie, you can see these big house projects. And have you ever checked how this family looks like inside these big family projects? If it's a specific family for the specific architecture, or there is no, comparison with how we live and what is the model of the family?
Actually, I don't know the exact research talking about, for instance, architecture.
There is no research like this, as far as I know.
But yeah, okay, that's only my intuition. Yeah,
sure.
Because the spatial differences between for instance village and the big cities, it's of course connected also with architecture. What is interesting for us according to family about housing.
Yeah, sure.
So that's obvious for me. Picture that in the village, most of the families are living in their own houses, and most of the families living in cities probably are living in flats in tenants' house. Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting examples of the diversification of those blocks of flats as far as tenants go is for Alternative Street, Alternative 4, because in few first episodes we see that people from all over the social map are coming to live in the same building, and some of them are bringing their livestock into their flats, and some of them are like big city singles that are looking for love in flats across the corridor. So I think it is interesting in connection to your question. Yeah.
Engineer Karwowski also lived in a tenant's house, at a big modern tenant house. Yeah.
So far we were talking about the family in general, and now I would like to switch the conversation a bit to the subject of family members. members, and starting with those two main figures in most 2+1 or 2+2 families, so to the mother and father. In the last family, though, we are looking at very unusual family because he is a world-renowned painter, and his fame is kind of puts a shadow on the whole family. The roles, the gender roles, the family roles are quite traditional. He is the head of a family, and she is a stay-at-home mom who has to take care of the whole unit, family unit. Would you say that this is still the case in Polish families? Because of course the movie was set in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but would you say that this traditional division of roles in the family is still something that is visible inside Polish families?
I would mention about researches made in late 90s, and these researches were showing that the division of roles in family are spread more or less equally. So there were three basic models in Polish family. The first one was typical traditional, represented more or less about 30% of families. So man as a head of the family, staying at home, mother or even working and caring about home and children, mother. And second model was more or less equal partner family. So working man, working woman, dividing between them the home duties. It was also about 30% of families, and the third division, the third sector, it was the so-called mixed model. So mixed model it means the man still is head of a family, but woman is working and earning also on family, but still without the voice and the decision voice in family, and caring about housing and so on. So probably after 20 years from this research, I would say the traditional model, it's still firm in the structure of Polish family, but for sure it is changing, that this model of equal partner family, it's getting
more and more popular.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Though I don't know if popularity is the best term to use describing
probably
the model
common
of the family.
More and more visible in structure.
Yeah, but what about mixed generation living in one flat apartment or whatever house they choose? Because we were talking about traditional model like 2+2, but in every model you mentioned there is additional +1, which is always a grandma or who is living alongside the family, and she has her duties and responsibilities. And so how many of us still are living with the second generation or third generation?
So you mean the multi-generational families? So
yeah, exactly.
Grandparents, parents, and children. Yeah, it's still visible, and still quite numbered. So it's about 20% of families. So 20% of people, 20% of population living in such families. So with grandmother or with grandparents. So free generation.
It's quite a lot. So it's decreasing or increasing?
It's decreasing. Yeah, it's decreasing, but not so visible, because when I'm looking on data, so since 2008, there's no change.
Since 2008.
Since 2008, there is no change. But before 2008, because I'm looking at my data, and my data are just showing this
period of time.
This period, yeah. But most probably before 2000 in last century, it was much more numbered in structure of family in Poland. So.
I'm wondering from your point of view, because in the last family we have very much the traditional image also of the elderly. We have those two grandmas that are refusing to die, and everyone is just waiting for them to die. They are invisible apart from that on the screen, and the fact that they are just there. But from your point of view, I'm wondering if the fact that we are, for example, that less percent than 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, lives in those multi-generational homes. Is it the result of the fact that the younger generation wants to be more independent than the previous generations, or is it the result of the fact that the older generation is more capable of still living active life than 30 years ago, and they do not want to be those grandmas and grandpas living only for the purpose of taking care of grandchildren?
I would say either. So it's a parallel tendency, yeah. But because of course the changes are showing that younger generation wants to be independent, and the last 30 years it's a period of changes, systematic changes, and systematic growth of wealth of Polish society. So. It's just also this kind of economical material dimension that we can afford to live in our own flat. Yeah. So if we are just starting. Accomplishing studies, starting work, we just want to separate. We just want to try independent life, and mostly it's possible that we can, if not to buy a flat, we can just rent a flat and trying to live on our own. And as you mentioned, the older generation. Also trying to switch on their own way of life, yeah, style of life, not necessarily living or even perceiving the situation not to be a burden to younger generation, yeah.
So if Polish youth isn't forced to live with parents, they won't do it, and the parents won't cry about it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably like in any other country.
And I think we are finishing slowly our conversation today at the Air of Wrocław Kultura, and I have a heavy question for the end of this conversation. I mentioned it to you before our show, and you were laughing about it because it's kind of a loaded question. There is a saying that in English would sound something like only on photographs would your kin look nice. Z rodziną dobrze wychodzi się tylko na zdjęciu. And most Polish movies that we mentioned and didn't mention in this meeting showed this kind of image of Polish family, that it's very good in keeping up appearances of happiness, but scratch a little on the surface and then all hell will break loose. Is there some truth in it? Is Polish family in reality very much concerned about appearing happy, but isn't under these pretenses?
If you are asking about happiness, as I said to you before, I wouldn't dare to answer if Polish family is happy. But scratching the datas, we would say that there is a kind of clash of different clashing with it datas. Like for instance, we are still perceiving family as a most valuable thing. It's a first value for in Polish society. But from the other side, for instance, there is still increasing number of divorces. Yeah, so. That's the clash of data, empirical data, and for sure, I would say I would rely on the picture showing in the film that there is no clear, pure picture of a family, and of course, systematic change. It was so deep. And still is so deep that it had to make any pressure on what's going on in family, on problems. Becoming in family, what films are showing, and it's valuable. It's valuable also to kind of knowledge about family.
I think that I will try to find something optimistic for the end of our conversation, because I think that there is something optimistic in what you just said, that there is more divorces than 30 years ago, because I don't think that Polish family was happier 30 years ago. I think maybe we are learning to shed off those appearances and not care about them as much, and maybe this is actually a good thing that we have the courage to break the cycle of unhappiness.
Pursuit of happiness, you mean?
Yeah. So I would like for us to finish this conversation with an optimistic note. This was Polish Cinema for Beginners Season 14 on the air of Radio Wrocław Kultura. We were talking about Polish family. If you haven't seen the video essay about that subject, go to Facebook or Instagram of Polish Cinema for Beginners. Next time we will see each other in Radio Wrocław Kultura will be in 2 weeks on 7th of August, and we will be talking about Polish church, another loaded subject.